Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to SciFrights, the film discussion podcast from the Interzone where horror meets science fiction. My name is Liam Dunn, and I'm a screenwriter, film critic, and a lifelong science fiction fan.
My name is Dr. Lindsay Hallam, and I'm the course leader of the Film and Screen Studies degree at the University of the Arts London, who specialises in horror cinema.
And we are in fact partners both in life and in crime, and we are die-hard film fanatics.
In today's episode, we discuss Claire Denis, a director who is more known for her work in arthouse cinema, and her 1999 film Beau Travail is probably one of my all-time favourite films.
Yes, but today we're discussing her foray into body horror with 2001's graphic tale of cannibalistic lust, Trouble Every Day, and her dark psychological space prison film High Life from 2018.
And just a reminder to everyone out there that we are going to spoil the hell out of these films. So if you haven't watched them already, please do so, and then we will be here when you get back.
We are excited to be joined today by another fantastic guest, filmmaker and programmer Craig Williams.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast. We can just start by having you tell us a bit about yourself, your filmmaking. You're the first filmmaker we've had on the podcast.
Oh, okay.
And your last film, The Fairy Moon, played at Fright Fest, and we discussed the film on our Fright Fest episode, so people can go and listen to that. Yeah, so just tell us how you got into film, and you do some programming at the Nickel.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, it all starts by just being a proper fanatic about this stuff anyway. I've always been such a huge enthusiast. It's always been such a big part of my life. It's never been something I've done professionally, but I've always done a lot around it. So I was programming with a group called the Badlands Collective for about 12 years. And then now do my own thing at the Nickel, which is I have a night every month called Cosmik Debris, and it's usually a double bill of two films I love. It's quite relatively broad remit, I suppose, but anything that would fall under that kind of exploitation psychotronic banner. And then a few years ago, I'd been thinking about making films for a long, long time, and had just never done it. And then when my son was born a few years ago, I thought, right, I've got to actually do it now. I don't want to I don't want him to be a teenager and for me to tell him, oh, I was going to make films, but I never did. So I made a folk horror, a Welsh language folk horror called The Worm of BWLCH. And then after that, did The Fairy Moon, which you saw on Fright Fest last year.
Terrific film.
Both of your films, you could say, have a bit of a folk horror vibe to them. Is that kind of the type of horror that you gravitate towards, or what is it that kind of got you into working in this kind of horror space?
I mean, it's always been such a huge part of my life, horror generally. With folk horror specifically, I've always been quite drawn to it because I'm from rural Wales. Growing up in rural Wales is folk horror. I'm always drawn to these ideas of place in horror, location, and also anything that draws on myth. So I always gravitate towards those kinds of ideas, which seem to solidify around folk horror. But at the same time, I realize folk horror is very easy to just go through the motions, people in robes, sacrifice, and things like that. So I do try and think about how I do it, but it comes into things even when I'm trying not to. I mean, I've got, I think, 3 feature films that I've written, and it's a werewolf film, a road warrior film, and a Norse myth-inspired cosmic horror. But there's folk horror in all of those as well. It's just it's such a part of how I think about horror generally, that it just always gets in there.
And you always work, it seems, with 16mm, and you've had Sean Price Williams, who's a legendary cinematographer. How did you get him to work on your films?
Yeah, so I think Sean is the biggest kind of film nerd I've ever met. He is just something else. I thought I was quite kind of in the weeds with this stuff, but he is something else entirely. So my producer Jules, who does these films with me, I know him because he's the only other lawyer I know in the film world. So we became friends from there, and then we decided to make the films together. And he went to New York Film Festival, and I told him before going, it'd be amazing if Sean Price Williams would be the dream as a person to shoot this film for us, but there's no way we'll get him. And then he ended up in a cinema with him where Sean puts on like his own film nights in a place called KGB in New York. And he was playing a Jess Franco film there. And Jules just went to sit with him and chat with him about it. And he just sounded really positive. And he said he'd always wanted to go to Wales. So I had a few conversations with him. We talked about like reference points and things. We just got on really, really well. So yeah, we just became friends first, I think. And then he agreed to do it. We had a lovely experience on the first one. And then he came out to Hertfordshire to do the Fairy Moon as well 2 weeks before he shot Charlie XCX in the moment. So we went from like sitting in my house watching Bluey with my 5-year-old to working with pop stars.
Wow,
amazing!
And what are you working on next, if you're allowed to talk about it?
yeah. I mean, I've got 2 scripts that are quote out there, whatever that even means these days, but. I think the budget might be they're both moving very slow because they've got reasonable sized budgets, I guess. So I've been trying to write something very low budget. So I've been writing this kind of Norse themed cosmic horror film set in York called Sister Valhalla. So I'm hoping I can get that made, but this year at some point. It's a feature as well, but we'll see, because there are challenges. It'll be a lot of outdoor, a lot of exterior stuff up here in York, and 60mm again. But we'll see. Maybe it's always tough to get these things off the ground.
I can imagine. So how do you feel about science fiction? So on this podcast, we're kind of looking at, we say, the interzone where horror meets science fiction. Yeah. So are you interested in science fiction as well? Yeah,
absolutely. I guess I was thinking about this before, and I thought, maybe I've not watched as many sci-fi films. But I think it's just there aren't as many sci-fi films as there are horror, I guess. I mean, this must come up for you all the time, where I guess you can make a horror film for no money, and you can make one for a hell of a lot of money. But I guess there's a kind of maybe an ingrained prejudice or a certain kind of accepted truth in science fiction that you need some kind of budget to do it, whereas that's obviously not always the case. You can see with films like Primer or Redux last year, but no, I've always really loved science fiction films. I'm very fond of reading science fiction as well. I like the kind of the 60s, 70s new wave authors. Michael Moorcock is a huge one for me. Philip K. Dick, obviously, but those science fiction authors that were bringing in very countercultural, psychedelic 60s types ideas into accepted like sci-fi subgenres like the space opera and stuff. I think that's where it really hits for me.
So do you kind of see that there's a lot of crossover between the genres? I mean, this idea of kind of the cosmic that seems to run through your work seems maybe sometimes this could be a connecting thread between the two genres, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I think they're both, at their best, I think they're both genres of ideas, where you use the imagery, you use the tropes to get into some bigger ideas, but they're also genres that have their own kind of tropes that work on that at that level as well. You don't need to make a horror film that speaks to society or certain kind of urban anxiety or anything like that. You can just make a straight horror film, and it's the same with science fiction as well. But I think in their core, they are genres that you can use in order to bring across certain ideas and certain philosophies, which I really like about both of them.
And that moves us into like the topic of today. So we're looking at Claire Denis. So when we pitched for you to come on the show, we said pick a director who has worked in horror and science fiction, and you came back with Claire Denis. I was hoping someone would choose her. But yeah, what was it that made you choose her?
So immediately when we were discussing this, I think we were discussing it at the Nickel, right? I thought Abel Ferrara, because of The Addiction and Body Snatchers, and I love Ferrara, but I've kind of written about him quite a lot and things. So I thought I'd give myself a challenge. I think because of the world I move in, I tend to talk about genre a lot, but you don't get that close to directors that come from a more art house background. So I thought it would be interesting to get into someone from the art house side who's done this, and it's someone whose films I've been watching since I've been 16, I guess. I've watched everything that she's done. I'm always excited by what she does next. And generally speaking, I am very suspicious of arthouse directors making genre films, because I just think they kind of get it wrong. They kind of, there's often a sense of trying to do something more than, like you're kind of disparaging the genre and you're trying to intellectualize it or something. But I don't think that's the case here. I think she does the opposite. She enriches it. So I think these are two really interesting films to talk about through that lens.
And what was your kind of entry point with Claire Denis? Do you remember the first film of hers that you saw?
Yes, I do. So even though I grew up in rural Wales, there was a theatre about 20 minutes from my house that was run by a former artistic director of the RSC somehow. I have no idea how this happened or how he got there, but it kind of brought a lot of attention to the theatre itself. And they had a cinema in the theatre, and the cinema was like, I guess you don't really get second run cinemas in the same way anymore, but it would play the big kind of art house releases maybe about 6 or 8 weeks later. So I was quite lucky that when I was in school, I could actually see these films in the cinema, even though I didn't live anywhere near a big city where they'd get released. And this is a bit of a bozo answer, and it's going to look really bad, but I thought it would be really impressive if I asked a girl to go and see a French film when I was 17, and Friday night was playing. I hadn't heard of Claire Denis. I hadn't seen any of her films before. She had to drive because she was older than me, to make it even more romantic. I couldn't even drive. And I went to see Friday night. It blew my mind. I think it's a kind of atypical film for her, but it's also quite a gentle way in to the stuff that she does. And I just have very, very fond memories of that film. And then after that, I was all in on her.
I mean, she is mostly known as this art house auteur. But she has worked in kind of different modes, different genres. But there is something about her films that feel like there is some kind of distinct signature. So, I mean, for you, what do you think characterizes a Claire Denis film? What are some of the kind of recurring maybe themes or techniques and things that you notice in her films?
Stylistically, they're very elliptical. There's seems to be very little dialogue, a heavy reliance on imagery, non-linear, strange editing, kind of unconventional structures. But I think that's usually to riff on some quite strong ideas. They often have, if they do have source material, they stray quite far from it, or they come at it from a different angle, or they incorporate different kinds of source material into it. Think about like what Bastards does with Kurosawa and with the William Faulkner novel. I think that's such an interesting way to approach that kind of material, and what Beau Travail does with Melville. There's obviously the focus on bodies all the time, the way that she has those extreme close-ups of different body parts in lots of different situations. This focus on marginal people from the margins of society that seems to come in everywhere. Like, she seems to come at this from every possible angle, which I think is fascinating. And then the kind of the hangover of French colonialism as well. Like, obviously she grew up all across Africa when her father was a colonial administrator, and that informs so much of the work in a very kind of simplistic sense. She makes films about outsiders coming from her own status as an outsider, but she also really engages with the legacy of the kind of French colonialism as well, which is in a way that I think is quite original, and especially when it's filtered through the genre work, I think it comes up with something that can be that's quite potent.
Liam, do you remember what was the first Claire Denis? Do you remember the first Claire Denis film you saw?
It was it Beau Travail? Because I mean, you would have shoved that at me at
yes.
one point.
Yeah. I think I made you. We went to the BFI because they were showing it on 35 millimeter, and I was like, you need to see this.
Yeah. But I don't recall seeing. I mean, when was that though? That
was a few years ago. I think it may have been. No, it was before the Claire Denis season, and then we saw a few, and then I made you go and see 35 Shots of Rom during the Claire Denis season as well.
Yeah, because I saw High Life at the cinema.
Yeah.
But it would have been before that.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it was that. I don't remember anything before Beau Travail, but maybe just because that's such a masterpiece that it's eclipsed every other memory. But I think it probably was that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it would have been Trouble Every Day, which we'll get into, because it was around the time I was doing my PhD on the Marquis de Sade, and so that it ended up being incorporated into my PhD. So that idea of kind of extreme cinema was what I was into at the time, which is interesting. That was my entry point, and then discovering her other films, and that she's not always working in that kind of space of this kind of extreme in your face, and that some of her films are so much more, I guess, gentle, like something like 35 Shots of Rum, or like Chocolat, her debut film, which I only saw just recently, which is also very autobiographical. White Material, I would think I also saw early on, and so realizing that she's not part of like someone like Gaspar Noé, or someone who's working always in that kind of extreme graphic kind of imagery. But then there's, like you mentioned, this to use a film theory term, haptic visuality, where there's always this tactile. It is always about the body, but it's also about the flesh and like skin. Yeah. Like you say, the close-ups, it's always so close to the body. And yet also at the same time, like you say, the colonial kind of history with France as well. And I was reading, like with Beau Travail, how she was given, when she got, I guess, the funding to make that film, the whole idea was that you had to make a film about foreigners. And so she turned it on its head, and it was like, well, make a film about when the French are foreigners, and the whole idea of the French Foreign Legion. And so she's always this, it always feels like there's something about, like I always go back to the idea of the other, and there's no otherizing in her film. She's always with the other.
Or it's like she is, that's her perspective. I mean, she is someone who spent like the kind of the formative parts of her life as the French foreigner, which is kind of, and I think that has such an impact. It must have such an impact on the way that you view the world. And thinking about, to think that you could have someone who can make a film like Trouble Every Day, or some of the kind of more troubling elements in Bastards, and yet also make a film that's like a tribute to Ozu, and still make it feel like it's the same person making them. That's quite an extraordinary thing, isn't it? It speaks to someone's artistry or their artistic vision.
I mean, she has worked within genre, so we'll talk about her horror and sci-fi films. So you mentioned Bastards, which I guess is almost like a noir or thriller.
Yeah.
And then like The Sunshine Inn, which is probably not my favorite of hers, but it's almost like a rom-com.
Yeah.
Do you think there's something different about when she does decide to kind of work in a kind of a genre?
No, I think she approaches it in the same way, which is what makes it so good, I think. But I guess the other one, there's the serial killer procedural.
I Can't Sleep.
I Can't Sleep, yeah, where you get that kind of, you get a serial killer procedural, but through a very different lens to what you usually get. So I guess it's kind of like something that gets closer to something like Cure in that sense, which is remarkable as well. But no, I think that's why you get that consistency of vision, because she seems to approach all of it in a similar way. But at the same time, I don't think she doesn't look down on the genre elements. She sees them as a kind of, as an integral part of the material, and I think that's what sets her apart from a lot of the more kind of the European auteurs in the way that they approach genre material. I think it really sets her apart in that sense.
I think I was reading an interview, and when she was talking about Trouble Every Day, and she was approached to make a horror film, and she kind of said something along the lines of that, if she was going to make a horror film, she said she wouldn't be at an ironic distance, which is interesting because it comes in 2001. So it's kind of the end of the 90s kind of ironic horror. And in some ways, it's almost like the Trouble Every Day kind of takes us into the 2000s with the kind of graphic turn that it takes. But yeah, I think she said something, I won't be at an ironic distance. If I do it, I will go into it. And I think that's just something about when she goes into genres in this really kind of intimate way. That just, I think sets them apart. All right, so let's just go into Trouble Every Day.
Mr. and Mrs. Brown.
Welcome to Paris, Mrs. Brown.
I hope you'll enjoy your stay.
No, Dr. Semino doesn't work here anymore.
Look into my eyes.
I really need to find him.
You see trouble every day.
Just up and left.
His wife is sick.
Sun inside.
Corey's sick?
He is very sick.
Get like you. You can blow such a slightest breath. And I know
You were in love with her? It's not the right word for it.
and this truck every day. This truck every day. This truck every day. This truck every day.
Do you believe in loyalty, Mr. Brown? What about betrayal? I would never hurt you.
Shane and June Brown arrive in Paris on their honeymoon, but something isn't right. Shane refuses to have sex with his bride, and he seems preoccupied with finding the whereabouts of Leo Semino and his wife Corey, who he had worked with previously on a scientific expedition to Guyana. Leo and Corey now live outside Paris, but things are not quite right with them either. Corey has an affliction, an insatiable craving for human flesh. Once she is engaged in a sexual act, she begins to devour her partner. Although Leo tries to keep her confined to their home, she keeps escaping, leaving Leo to clean up the mess and victims she leaves in her wake. While working with Leo, Shane had stolen Leo's findings, using himself and Corey as test subjects. Now Shane is desperate not to succumb to the same sickness, meeting with Leo's previous colleagues who tell him he has been expelled from the scientific community because of his research. Two young men who have been watching Leo and Corey's house break in. They find Corey behind a barricaded door, and she looks at them suggestively, sliding up her dress. One of the men breaks through the door and they begin to have sex, but it soon descends into a cannibalistic frenzy, Corey regressing to a primal animal state. Shane locates the Semino's house and he finds Corey still days after her last attack, having just struck a match in order to set the house and herself on fire. Shane tells her he is sick and they start to hug and then tear at each other. Shane strangles Corey and leaves her as the house burns down. Shane still refuses to be intimate with June, stopping an attempt at sex by going to the bathroom to masturbate. Then he leaves the hotel and spends the night sleeping by the River Seine. The next day he returns, going to the maid's locker room where one of the maids, Christelle, is undressing after a shift. A sexual encounter begins, but inevitably turns violent, as Shane can no longer control his hunger for flesh, cannibalizing Christelle. June arrives back at the hotel and finds Shane in the shower. They are now ready to go home, embracing as a bloody drop of water falls down the shower curtain, a look of uncertainty in both of their eyes. So yeah, how did you first see Trouble Every Day? Because it was from the beginnings of it being screened, like it premiered in Cannes, became this very notorious film quite quickly.
Yeah, and I was at that age very kind of drawn to anything that had that kind of reputation. You know, you're talking about being drawn to extremities and things. That was certainly the case with me. So I think I was in university when I watched it. I absolutely loved it at the time, and I was speaking with someone about this earlier today. Like it made such an impression that there are parts of it that I'd remembered somehow because I've used them in other things because they've just been so ingrained. So before this week, I'd only watched it twice. I'd watched it when it came out, and then I watched it when The Final Girl screened it at the Prince Charles a few years ago, and it just blew my mind all over again. And I think one of the things that surprised me reading about it again this week was the fact that I had just assumed that it was this canon classic now, that it was just acknowledged as this, like, one of the greatest horrors ever made, one of the best films of the 2000s. But it turns out like it got a real kick in from a lot of people when it came out, from a lot of the predictable reasons, but also from some other more interesting angles as well. So I guess I'd just blown it up in my head as this great classic and assumed that was the general feeling on it. But it seems a lot knottier than that.
Well, it is a great classic, and but I think the reason why is that I think because we're all, you're preaching to the choir here, but watching it again for this, I mean, I've only seen it a couple of times, but it still feels dangerous. I think that's the thing, is that it's over 25 years old, and it still feels really ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Like, and I think, in the time since then, I mean, you had the new French extremity at that time, but then now in between that, you've had all this quote unquote elevated horror and all of this sort of stuff. And I think Claire Denis is always completely in her own lane and just like able to make this film that still, I think, shocks people all these years later. And I remember, I think I only saw it on DVD because you showed it to me. I'm a bit of a Claire Denis newbie, by the way. I'll be learning from you two on this episode, I think. But I remember being into film at the time when it came out and reading like magazines and stuff and hearing about it. And it had this reputation, I think, of just this like film that, only for the hardcore. This is really extreme, this, that, and the other, and seeing just stills from it and imagining I imagined what the film was like in my head for so long before seeing it.
And then what was it like when you saw it?
It was even crazier and more fucked up than I thought it was going to be. I mean, it's I think it has that reputation, and I think it still holds its power.
I think like the thinking about the stills from it, I think I remember at the time when it came out, they used the still of Beatrice Dahl with the blood on the wall in the background, because there's often these quite like still compositions and stuff in the film. But I don't think, even though those stills look like they're suggesting something that might be quite transgressive, I don't think they get across just how close she gets and how kind of how visceral and how awful the violence is in it, because the stills still look artful, don't they, when you see them like that? But it's obviously a very different experience when you can feel like skin being pulled by teeth, like you do in the film.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I remember, it was the first Claire Denis film I ever saw in Australia. I don't know how it got released. I remember ordering the Tartan Extreme DVD from here in the UK and getting it sent over to Australia, because it felt like that was the only way I was going to be able to see it. And I'd heard, because at Cannes, I think when it was premiered, there were tales of people fainting, or that people couldn't handle the violence. Yeah. But it's also interesting, as I over time realizing it was the first film that she made after Beau Travail. And like Beau Travail was like her big, very big kind of breakthrough of signaling her as this art house auteur, this rising star of like European French cinema. And so I can imagine that to go from Beau Travail and everyone like, oh, the new Claire Denis film, what's she going to do next? And then this is it, must have been like shocking for a lot of people.
I love it when people do it.
Yeah. There was a real negative, because it was this whole thing of like, it was just, too much, but also at the same time, it's really boring. That was one of the kind of big criticisms. And I was looking up, and it got lots of like, oh, who's the guy in The Guardian that always, Peter Bradshaw or something like that. And he always gives like the best things like 1 star. He gave it 1 star. Yeah, it's definitely, I think, a film that over time has grown in kind of estimation for people.
It's quite interesting when a film has a kind of reaction where people, you talk about the fainting, right? Like, I know it's a very useful thing to be able to talk about, but I think when a film provokes that kind of reaction in people, it can provoke quite extreme reactions in critics as well, can't it? You look at like Von Trier, like if someone says that they're offended by it or they're upset by it, then there's always a very kind of a prominent critical position to be like, no, I'm way above this. Like I'm not at that level. I don't respond to it like that. I'm able to separate myself from it, which always seems like a little bit of a flex. This is a real side note, but I'm always interested in this with people. Have you ever fainted in a film because of violence or content?
No.
But as soon as I hear a film does that, especially when I was younger, especially, I was like, I've got to see this now.
2 tickets, please.
Yeah.
I always saw it as like, definitely when I was younger, I was like, oh, I need to test myself.
Challenge. Yeah.
It was always like, can I do it? How far can I go?
Yeah.
The one film that I remember, there were actually 2 films that have made me go, oh, I think this is kind of coming to my limit, was Men Behind the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't watched it all, but seen bits of August Underground. That was like,
that was it for me. Definitely.
Yeah, I'm like,
I don't need to.
I don't know.
This.
Yeah.
No, I draw the line with the kind of like the guinea pig films and stuff like that. It's kind of not really my thing anyway. But I think the one of the weirdest I've had was Passion of the Christ. I found that like really, I wasn't religious or anything at all, but I think it's that the way that it's filmed with such kind of like filled with all this anger and religious ecstasy and the violence, and that's still to this day the only film I actually did faint in, which is ridiculous. But that's the power of Mad Mel.
Yeah. And it's all about, again, it's very similar to Trouble Every Day. It's all about the body and breaking it down. So the film kind of is focusing on these 2 couples. You've got Corey and Leo, and you've got Shane and June. And then the film opens with this shot of this couple in a car kissing, and then you never see them again. So it's kind of very set. It's all about this romantic relationships and sexual desire. But yet, as we've been talking about, very, very violent films. So kind of what do you think, I mean, especially using the horror genre, what is Denis saying about like desire, romance, relationships with this film?
It's an amazing thing to open with that, because firstly, it's a very it's quite a good horror trope. The young couple kind of doing like embracing each other in a car like that, especially the way it's shot from that angle from behind. And it's like a weird anti-mission statement for the film, where it's the only quote unquote traditional kind of interaction like that you get in the film. Everything is almost like a corrupted or a distorted version of that afterwards. Like the first meeting between Vincent Gallo and Beatrice Dalle is just like remarkable, where you've got that combination of the sexual desire, but also the very like primal animalistic thing that's there as well, like kind of violence that's just underneath, where they're kind of like pushing and pulling at each other. So it's just it's an amazing way to set the tone for the rest of the film, and the fact that you just have so many different distorted versions of that all the way through, right up until the final sequence in the shower.
And it's also interesting that in that scene, I never thought of that, but it totally is setting up the trope of, and then they're going to be punished for the desire or something. But then maybe it's just because having seen the film afterwards, but it's almost like, but no, I guess the threat here is just the desire they have for each other. Like, where is that going to go? Or where could that go? And they're kissing, and it's this whole thing of like, it's just a step away from the biting that we see later on.
They are going at it so hard. It looks like they are trying to eat each other. And I think it's kind of setting us up for that, as well as kind of showing you kind of a somewhat normal relationship before you get into the extremity that happens later. But linking this kind of desire with this animalistic, almost predatory notion of devouring and wanting to possess the other person.
And that's the scene, and the scene straight after is is also playing with a kind of horror trope where Beatrice Dalle's on the side of the road and the lorry driver pulls up, and you think you've seen this interaction a million times in these kinds of films, and then it turns to her eating the lorry driver. It's a kind of it's an amazing way that the film just flips it immediately like that.
And then you also get with that scene, with Beatrice Dalle or with Corey, I guess it is also setting up the trope of, it's almost like, it seems like, oh, she's a sex worker, and, they're usually the ones that are killed. But then she turns out, but then you also get Leo who arrives, and just the way that Dahle is kind of looking in the distance, it seems like she's just not there, and the tenderness that he has with her. So it's already kind of setting up I don't know, just so many kind of frictions between, but especially the relationship between Leo and Corey, I think.
I love that relationship in it. I think it's one of the things that really kind of keeps it in a sort of Gothic tradition as well. The idea of their helper. I know he's not like a Renfield character or anything, but there's that kind of the person that works in service of someone. But obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that in this particular film, given that, there's the implication that he might have been, that he's the one that brought it on her, that there's an element of guilt in why he's with her, but also there is genuine affection, the bit with the sponging the blood off her skin and like saving her from herself, but also saving him from this as well. It's a really complex way of doing that role, but it is quite a traditional Gothic role that he has in there, which I think is an interesting lens with which to see that relationship.
I've never even thought of that, because also there's the whole thing of like lock the mad woman in the attic kind of thing, and the young guys that are watching, so that he has to keep trying to lock her away, and she keeps having to escape. Yeah, I never even thought of that.
I thought of it as like the Princess in the Tower, except it's got this like there's a twist on it that like she's trapped in there because she's dangerous, like she can't be let out. But and these the young men are almost like the knights trying to go up and rescue her, but they're fucked.
Yeah. Exactly, and the kind of it's so overgrown outside. Everything is really overgrown outside the flat, and you've got that kind of when those lads are trying to get in and they're pulling like metal boardings and things off the house. I think it's it plays with that Gothic trope really well. I think that's something that also comes up in Vincent Gallo's performance. I mean, he actually when he actually does the kind of the Nosferatu stance, doesn't he, when he's in front of the camera and things. So I think it is something that they play up to a little bit.
And I think that scene where he's kind of playing to the camera, I think they're at Notre Dame as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're on, yes. Yeah. Which brings us to, the other couple. So you've got Shane and June, they're on their honeymoon in Paris, which is seen as this city of love. That opening scene with the couple then moves to these shots of the Seine and the river. That you're seeing that, this honeymoon there's something wrong. Shane refuses to kind of consummate. And quite quickly, the first scene with them is on the plane on the way to Paris. He's kind of kisses her arm, and it's almost biting up her arm. And then he goes into the bathroom and has the visions of June and with all this blood on her. So it makes me think of like, how aware is June of what's going on, and kind of why did Shane even agree to marry her?
I think the fact that you don't know how aware she is of what's going on is one of the brilliant aspects of the film, because whichever way you read it, it's a really her role is quite a distressing one, isn't it? If you see that she does know what's going on, that's very troubling. But if she doesn't as well, then you realize the kind of danger she's in. I like the idea that scene on the plane immediately follows the introduction to Beatrice Dahl's character, because you get the sense that this is what happens when the corrupted form of desire is completely unrestrained, and this is what happens when someone is trying to restrain themselves from it. And it just, the whole thing, the fact that their relationship feels so kind of quietly strained, I think you get the sense that you're not sure why he's doing it, you're not sure why she's doing it, and whether she knows anything. And I think that's where so much of the engine of the film comes from, is the fact that does he have plans for her, or is he trying to do this to be normal and to try and kind of cure himself of this? But at the same time, he is going to the place where he's going to find answers to whatever's going on with him, and he's also there's also that sense that he's being drawn in by someone who's already completely in the thralls of this, whatever this affliction is. And they show them crossing the sea. It's like the Dracula thing again, with the ship coming over, isn't it? You're being drawn to the place where this horrible thing's going to be consummated. And
it also makes me think this idea of the honeymoon, because it makes me think of Daughters of Darkness, which is also the honeymoon. And June herself, she's got this little pixie haircut, and she wears these like little suits, like almost kind of Jackie Kennedy kind of look to her, and all the white, and she always wearing gloves, which is interesting. But then you have moments where you see on her shoulder there is a bite mark. And I think towards the end, she's got a bit of a cut on her lip. So there are these marks that...
Yeah.
And so it makes you think, like, have there been moments where it's almost... And how did she react to it? And then she's still marrying him. And I think at one point after... Like I think after he's seen Corey and he goes back and they almost seem like they're about to have sex, but then he goes and masturbates in the bathroom and she's knocking on the door. And I think she may even say something like, you lied to me. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. It's just, there is such an ambiguity around their relationship, but then June herself, she just is this like prototype of just the innocent being drawn into all of this.
Definitely, that when she turns up with the puppy at the end that he's got as well, because it's already kind of like pulled the rug under, that scene where he's looking in the pet shop and you're thinking, oh god, no, where are we going with this? But then she's walking in with it, he's washing the blood off, and there's a kind of an implication of knowledge, but there's also this sense of innocence that's there. But with the fake baby, the puppy that's being held, it's a really potent image.
Also, thinking about the way that you have this juxtaposition between the two couples, where Leo and Corey, like you're showing like a couple where both of them are aware of this affliction, right? Of that. And they're trying to manage it together. I mean, it's not perfect because she keeps escaping and killing people, but like. Then you have Shane and June, and Shane is so afraid to reveal his desires to her that become so unleashed that he'll kill her. So he's trying to keep it all inside, and that's being projected outwards towards the maid who kind of is circling this couple in the hotel narratively. And so it's almost like this thing of like the difference between a woman having these desires and a man having these desires, and the way these different couples deal with the situation. I find really interesting that it's almost like if June were allowed in, maybe they could manage it somehow, or I don't know. But I always think about those two as being kind of the opposite ends.
It's really interesting, that shot when they first arrive, when they first arrive in the hotel and they start kissing on the bed while the maid is in the middle of making up the bed as well. And you've got like the camera in the corner just looking over it. And it's really awkward. And at first you think, oh, this might be some, they're ignoring the, quote unquote help, but it's something much more, something much darker than that.
And it is this whole thing of like Christelle just being invisible, but then I think they stop and then June helps make the bed.
Yeah.
There's this recurring motif of like white sheets throughout the film as well. And the fact that they can get so bloodied. But it brings us to Christelle. So what is the role? So you've got these two couples to focus on coupling, romantic relationships and desire and the role that plays. But then you have Christelle as well. So like what role is she playing amongst all of this?
It's almost like she's set up to be, she's clearly quite drawn to Vincent Gallo's character in the film. And it's almost like that's the more traditional versions of desire that's there, but she's also set up to be almost a useful victim narratively. Like we know what's going to happen to her because she's relatively prominent in the film, but we also get to see her. We also focus on her a bit more than we would just another normal murder victim in that kind of film. Like there's that really tender moment where she's like washing her feet it's quite a complicated role, and I think it's meant to I think it draws empathy. I think it's meant to draw a bit of feeling to show just how innocent people can get caught up in this in this affliction that the two of them have.
And it just feels like she's set up as like prey. Like there's one of the first shots is that behind her, there's always this focus on the back of her neck, and it just seems like that it's exposed. And yet the fact that she's kind of the working class character amongst these people who are obviously seem much more well off. At one point, Shane even says, "Yeah, I like money." So there's this class difference. She's a servant, and the fact that you see her kind of almost scavenging, like she takes some of the food from the kind of room service plates, and you see in her locker she's got all like, it looks like all the little skincare from the hotel. It feels like this very kind of almost obvious like predator prey hierarchy, maybe perhaps that's going on, but yet it troubles that by like you say, you have all this kind of empathy for her and these moments with her. And you get to see her, like, she arrives from work and she kisses her, I guess, boyfriend, and then she goes in with all the other people, people that work there. So she has all this, friendships and things. So yeah, she definitely isn't just a victim.
Like, her role in the film might be to be prey, but obviously the way, the fact that you get all those additional things, it shifts the weight of it a little bit, which is what's interesting.
I think that makes the final scene when Shane does kill her all the more powerful. I mean, it would be a bit gratuitous, I think, if we didn't really know anything about her. And I think it just hits so much harder because we feel the loss of that life than if we weren't shown all those little bits. Because I love that little aside where you're just kind of suddenly following her and and of course that fills you with dread because you're like, oh no, what's going to happen to her? But I think that adds so much power to that final scene.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah.
Also, we have amongst it all this mystery about how did Shane and Corey actually get to be the way they are, and that it becomes clear that it's obviously something to do with some medical expedition that they did in Guyana, and it's unclear whether Leo kind of experimented on, because then there's also a bit where Shane's going and talking to the colleagues that Leo used to work with, trying to track him down. And at one point, there's one scientist who you can tell does not like Shane at all. And I think maybe there's kind of implied that maybe Shane stole some of the research, and maybe he was the one that maybe infected himself, or because I think he said that the company I'm in was really interested in what he was doing, and almost like that we needed to get results now, so let's just go ahead. What do we know about the research, and why is so much, do you think, kept ambiguous? Because it almost could be seen as like a kind of Jekyll and Hyde or like a mad science film.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely in there. And I think the way that sequence is shot is almost done with the knowledge that that there is that element of the mad science film, because you think those sequences in the lab, those should be where you would traditionally get the explanation for what's happening, but it's so elliptical and it's so obscured. No one ever says what they mean in that situation. Nothing is ever explained. You don't look at the computer screen long enough to be able to see exactly what's on there. I mean, obviously we can now, we can pause, but the way that you're meant to see it, you're only just meant to see the odd word and things. And also, I'm not 100% sure, but when I was watching this new Blu-ray of it, the quality of the image changes in there, and it looks like it might be 16mm instead of 35mm. So it's a lot grainier, and you can't see anything with the same kind of clarity that you do with the 35mm elsewhere. So it's almost like there's a deliberate decision from a filmmaking perspective to try and do as much as possible to obscure this scene, which could otherwise, or these sequences, which could otherwise, quote, explain what's happening, because you just want some kind of idea, right, within the narrative. You don't need any of this. You don't need any of this explaining. It makes it much more interesting not having it, but, just being able to point to something in that way. And I think it also, the fact that it's Guyana as well, it speaks to those kinds of, the Dr. Moreau and things, the film where you go abroad, you act like God, and you come back and, you've brought back something horrible. And I guess that's a big part of the Gothic tradition, but there's also it's a big part of French culture as well. And the fantastic literature that came out of colonialism, and was even something like Tourneur's, I Walk with a Zombie, that's clearly had such a huge influence on French filmmaking. And Bonello went back to it with Zombie Child. So it's clearly something that's very much at the forefront of filmmakers' minds in France.
Yeah, I absolutely love how obscure the exposition is, and how I think it's one of the film's strengths is it pulls back from that. And I think there's even a moment where one of the scientists that Shane's talking to calls the research paper nonsense, which again is mocking. It's kind of mocking our desire for answers. Like, we're just never really sure what happened. We just know that they have this condition now. And I as someone who loves the mad science films and loves the kind of hearing the kind of the origin stories and things like this within, and the exposition in films, I also love it when the filmmaker deliberately pulls that away from you and leaves you with the kind of the mystery unresolved.
And it's funny because I had to do the commentary on the new Blu-ray. I had to like watch the film in detail, so I did pause with the computer screen, and it says something like, so it's something about plants, and it's interesting because plants come up again in High Life. It says something like, these samples and analyses should in the near future help us to focus our pharmacological research into nervous diseases, pain, mental diseases, and problems of libido.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yes. So definitely, I think there is this colonial aspect of going to this place, taking these resources, and it almost is bringing it back almost to like literally kind of cure white impotence. I find quite interesting. But let's get to the scenes, the two scenes that made the film so notorious. So you have two very graphic scenes of violence. We have Corey, who cannibalizes the young guy. There's two young guys next door who break in, and she kind of starts biting his face. And then, as we've talked about, you've got Shane attacking and killing Christelle. So yeah, let's just talk about how these scenes, they're so disturbing. They really are. Like, they are really graphic and they are so disturbing. And they do kind of stand out with the rest of the film that feels much more, everything else kind of takes its time, and there's a little dialogue. And what was it like when you first saw this film? What was your reaction to these scenes?
When I first saw them, I was quite surprised and taken aback by both of them, and I saw them as both being very similar. And I think watching it a couple of times since, I realized they're both very different. They're both very different scenes. Like that first one with Corey, for example, it's happening to someone who we've barely seen in the film, someone we don't really know, someone who's, like whatever, a petty criminal or whatever. But also it focuses on Corey as the perpetrator of the act and the impact that it has on her, and some of the looks, some of the expressions on her face that you could only describe it as ecstasy. And it's filmed in that kind of ecstatic way almost. She's always above. The camera has that kind of full view of her face and the blood coming out. It does feel like a more ecstatic version of violence than the second one, where Shane is on top of her and the camera is looking down as well on them, and there's also the fact that he's more tortured about it. There's no kind of enjoyment. It's just a horrible scene that feels so futile and things. So I think that both scenes are very, very powerful, but I think once you watch them in separated from that initial shock, I think you realize how different they are.
The Corey one especially is still really, like, it is hard to watch, and it's especially with like the wheezing of the young man, like as he's kind of dying, and she's like almost playing with her food in a way, like, and just like really just getting there. And just, but it's like you wait for the cut, you wait for it to cut away to another thing. Like it's almost like it would make me more comfortable if she went and then started chewing on his hand or was tearing out like intestines or something. But it stays on like her like fingering the wound and like licking his like chewed off lips, and it just doesn't let you like get away from it and makes you sit there and watch it. And it's like, and I think that's just holding on these kind of repetitive things rather than changing it up and giving us different aspects to it, I think really makes it so palpable. What I really like about it as well is the kind of the seduction beforehand with the real close-ups of the skin and that and the body parts to the point of abstraction, like almost like we don't know what we're even looking at after a while. And then it just builds and builds from there until there's this. She's just kind of screaming at the end, and I agree about the Christelle scene of like how, because they're both Corey and Shane approach their affliction in these completely polar opposite ways. That his is so much more contained and controlled in a way, and it's almost like it's him finally giving in to his urges, but it's not a celebratory act like Corey's is. It's absolutely the opposite. It's just it's his torture for him, even though he's the perpetrator and he's doing these horrible things.
Well, it's funny because I remember when I first saw it, definitely for me, the first scene was the more kind of stomach churning as you were watching it. And yeah, that you do have this extreme. The camera just gets so close. I mean, Agnes Goddard's cinematography, it does create like it always this whole thing of like it's almost a cliche of like the body becomes a landscape, but it is so close that you almost don't know where on the body the shot is.
Yeah.
And then she starts biting, and then there's all this blood, and it's all focused on like around the face, which is just really horrible. And he's wheezing and the screams, but then it also just keeps cutting to like Shane just drinking coffee in a cafe.
Oh yeah, in the bistro. Yes, of course.
Yeah. And then, but then you also do have the score, the music. It's almost slightly dreamy, like saxophone. So it's all this kind of jarring juxtapositions. But then over time, I find Christelle's murder much more difficult to watch. Yeah. I mean, just the fact that it's not on the face, but the fact that he bites her crotch. So it's this whole thing of like the literal like eating out, but it's just horrible. And it's this like, I guess, anxiety around like oral sex of it could become a bite. And it is just like the worst nightmare. And then after when he comes up and there's blood on his face, it's just horrible. And then as he goes, he's basically, you see him like he is fucking her. So it's and so just the implications of the scene, it's just the more you think about it, the more fucking horrible that scene really, really is. And because we know Christelle so much more. And also it's interesting that the fact that the location of the room is like the location of it happening is a changing room, and it's kind of near the bathroom, and they've got the sheets where it's obviously the laundry, and again you've got sheets, and I think he wipes his face on the sheets. So there's just for me that's just both the scenes are just so impactful, and it doesn't matter how many times you watch it. Like even, having to do a commentary over those scenes. I mean, I had to do commentary for Martyrs as well. It's like, it's a very strange experience to be trying to talk intellectually over the most graphic, horrible shit you've ever been filmed.
I think with Martyrs, it approaches that kind of point of almost like Zen. There's like a certain kind of certain register that it gets to with Martyrs because of how sustained it is all the way through. Whereas here, they come out of nowhere. Like that first one does come out of nowhere, and I agree. I think that second one is a lot more horrific. I love that idea of it being in the changing room, that kind of like in between space between where life is acted in the hotel room, and then there's the where you prepare for it, and you've still got all this ephemera from the hotel in there, like the sheets and stuff. It's amazing image. And then you get the bloodied sheets, the same place where she washed her feet, so you get that kind of religious element to it as well. It's I think they're two remarkable scenes. They're scenes of like true horror, and you don't often get scenes of true pure horror in horror films. Like, and when they come, I think they show you the real power of horror cinema when it's doing what it really should be doing.
And then so much that kind of been written about the film, like I have written about it and see it as this kind of cannibal film, but then a lot has been written about and kind of sees the film as almost like a take on the vampire film. You have these traditions or these subgenres of cannibal films and the vampire films. I mean, do you see it fitting in either of these subgenres, or how is it relating to cannibal or vampire stories?
It's funny. I always forget it's a cannibal film because I always treat it as a vampire film. But I think substantively it is about cannibals. But I think the way that it's approached tonally, it is like a vampire film. The kind of you've got the one who's given into it completely, and then the other one who's trying not to, who's living the kind of day-night life. I think, and the fact that they, like we were talking about with him in Notre Dame, where he's doing the Nosferatu thing. There's all these references, all these kinds of tropes that come from vampire films, but it's almost like it's written its own version of what a cannibal film could be. Because I think when you're talking cannibal films, you're talking about a very specific cycle of Italian cinema, right? And quite stylized version of Italian cinema, with the way that music is used, the way library music is used as well, and all the other kind of awful things around that tends to happen around the cannibalism in those films, like with animals and stuff. So I think it's very far away from that version of the cannibal film, but it's also it's almost made its own version of what that could be.
And it makes me think, like, in particular, when I think of Kore, I think of also like Jose Larraz's vampires.
Yeah.
Like a lot of like the European female vampire films, especially of the 70s. The female vampires in that often do seem more kind of animalistic. I also think of like in Fascination, where all the vampires turn on the Bridget Leahy character, all kind of devouring her. So yeah, there's some like connections to that. And I guess also it just kind of goes back like maybe just like cat people as well.
Yeah.
The whole fear of turning, and that's about marriage and consummation of the marriage.
I think the vampirism angle is interesting, and I can see where people say it's kind of cannibalistic as well, because I think you associate, you talk about vampires and like Dracula and this and that. This is inherent sexuality to the vampire because they have this charisma about them, and there's something sensual about the drinking of blood. And it's like, but this film is like, no, sex and arousal is what drives you towards the killing. And it's like, it's not this kind of metaphor or this romantic element. It's like, it's the bodily function, and it's intrinsically part of their biology. And I think that's where you get the cannibalism side of it, of like, it's almost this biological need. And so I think it's stripping away that romanticism and the kind of fantasy of it and saying, well, what if sexual desire causes the vampirism? It's not that vampirism is inherently sexual. It's the sexual drive that's causing this to happen. And I think that's where you kind of get down into more of the kind of the gristle of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think that this film ends up being such an important film, thinking of films since then. And like, I think it's just a few years. I don't know when In My Skin was made, which is also considered kind of part of the New French Extremity.
Yeah.
But that's like kind of self-cannibalism. But then I also think of like other female cannibals seems to be a thing, like obviously Julia Ducournau's Raw, and this turn, like especially like female directors working with body horror. It makes me think now that Trouble Every Day is such, I think, an important film. I feel like its influence is there in so much more now.
It's all over Raw. Like, when you remember the stories that came out when Raw first started screening, it felt like the same thing as well. And it's even the same. It has the same texture. The way that the cannibalism is shown in Raw has that same kind of texture to it. And it's still it still shocked a lot of people, didn't it? There were still stories around, people finding that quite hard and to watch in a cinema and things, which is a remarkable thing to do when you think you've moved beyond that kind of thing. But it seems to have a huge influence on that particular one.
And then also the fact that a lot has been written, especially I think recently, maybe it's because a lot of the New French Extremity films have got big Blu-ray releases and things. And there was a season curated by Anna Bogatskaya from the final girls of the New French Extremity at the BFI, I think around 2022. And so this has been considered kind of one of a key film, maybe near the beginning, kind of seen as starting around the late 90s, and this comes out 2001. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, like, do you even consider the New French Extremity a movement? How do you think this film kind of sits within, what was happening in French cinema at that time?
I'm generally quite suspicious of names being ascribed to movements that are not self-consciously movements, especially when they come from someone like a critic outside of genre, which is I guess is what happened here, right? The Art Forum essay where this comes from is the term is used pejoratively to refer to a certain type of film, and it's the same with elevated horror. To me, is like people who don't actually want to watch horror films or engage with horror films, so they create this new idea that makes it acceptable for them. Vulgar auteurism. It's like, just watch the Fast and Furious and enjoy it. You don't need an intellectual excuse to do so. But I mean, there are commonalities between the films that are grouped under that banner. But I think the banner itself is unhelpful because it separates it from horror. Like, these are great horror films. They're not like great versions of New French Extremity. Now, I do like that in recent years we've been able to use the term, but also treat them as great horror films. I think the Alexandra West's book, on this was a great example of that. And like you mentioned, Anna's season at the BFI does that as well. It's a kind of, I think it's a helpful shorthand to group a certain type of film together. But I think there is no separation. There's no elevation. They are great horror films, but they're also very different from each other as well. I think, I would say, Martyrs and Inside are two of the best horror films of the last 30 years, but they're also quite different to what Gaspar Noé was doing as well. And I think one of the interesting things about it is by calling it something and including the word French in it, it makes it seem like it's going to be a bit more artistic. So like my mum, for example, went to see Irreversible in the cinema because it was French, because like she kind of thinks like, oh, it's going to be French, it's going to be very artistic, so I'll go and see it. So I think that's a kind of a side effect of the label, which also includes the word French in it.
Well, it's funny because I saw Irreversible in Perth in Australia at the French Film Festival. And so I remember it's the film that I remember seeing that had more walkouts than I've ever experienced in a cinema screening. I started counting and I got past 20 people leaving the film. And I remember it was because it was that, in Perth every year, I'm assuming they still have it. Yeah, it was the French Film Festival where it was bringing together all French films. And it was always usually the very nice French films of provincial people in rural parts of France, kind of in the countryside, all kind of very idyllic kind of films. And so this film stood out. And I remember it would have just been people who would have just gone thinking, oh, it's a film, oh, it's playing that night at the French Film Festival, let's go see it. We'll be very hoity-toity. And and they were not prepared.
Oh, the Audrey Tautou film is sold out. What else is on?
Yeah.
Yeah, this might be the new Very Long Engagement.
But I mean, also, we went to Miskatonic Institute the other day and your friend Shelley McMurdo did a talk about gore in horror films, and there was an interesting thing about, because you're talking about New French Extremity being French and being somewhat considered more artistic, and there's that versus like the torture porn that was being done at the same time in the United States, and that's seen as vulgar and crass, while as the stuff that's being made in France is being seen as like somewhat elevated and a bit more artistic. And I think there are these the way we use labels on these like quote unquote movements really speaks volumes about the way that they're treated publicly or historically as well.
Exactly. And it's always like labels like that come from outside the scene or come from outside the genre to start with, because, I think there are elements of like, I don't know, Joe D'Amato's Black Emanuelle films that have some things in that are the most disturbing things I've ever seen, some of the most challenging things I've ever seen in a film. And I'd say there's still a seriousness of purpose to those films, but no one's gonna turn around and call that the new Italian extremism or anything. It's, I think it's good to be suspicious of the label, but I think it is helpful. It is sometimes helpful to group films together in a movement like that. But I don't think anyone would say these days that like Alexandra Aja is anything like, I don't know, Catherine Breillat, are they?
No. Yeah. And it's the thing was like with both New French Extremity and torture porn, like you say, they're coined in articles that are basically shitting on these films. And it's used in a very a derogatory way. But, there's some interesting like reading around like into more kind of, I guess, academic texts. There was some really interesting, like Tim Palmer, he talked about cinema du corps, which is basically cinema of the body. But the way he kind of talked about these films is really interesting. And he was just kind of going like, there are, I think one of his articles, he was basically talking about Trouble Every Day, 29 Palms from Bruno Dumont, and Irreversible by Gaspar Noé, and just kind of talking about, there's these auteurs, but they're working in this kind of particular register. And he talks about later, the cinema of brutal intimacy, which I like.
Nice.
But the way it's not like the James Quant article from Art Forum where he coins the term New French Extremity. The way he's talking about it at some points, like he hates all these films. Yeah. And he's like, why are they doing this? Why? Oh, Claire Denis and Bruno Dumont, they made these amazing films. Why are they doing this now? And
they're cheapening themselves or something. Yeah. But I think even like some of the torture porn directors, like they can be quite, whatever anyone thinks of Eli Roth, he is a scholar of horror. He is someone who knows his horror history and things. I think that particular term and the provocation that's inherent in that particular term, I think meant that films like Hostel and Hostel 2 and things got really underrated. Like they are, those, to me, they are films that try and engage with that idea of the idiot American abroad, like doing stupid things and getting a comeuppance. I remember watching Green Inferno in Fright Fest that year and finding it just so funny, just really like flat out hilarious because of that idea of, the do-gooder going abroad and getting more than they bargained for and things. I think there's a lot in those films, but unfortunately he got kind of damned by that particular term and associated with it. But I think people are always much more than what those particular terms are, and the less airtime they're given, the better, I suppose. I mean, the elevated horror just boils my piss like nothing else. I just
post horror,
post horror. It's just beyond unacceptable. I remember reading, naming no names, I remember reading a review of The Witch for a relatively big publication that said, this is a great film and it's more than horror. It's a great film because it's more than horror. And you think, what does that mean? It's more than horror. It's a great horror film. That's why it's why it's so good. There's always going to be this. It's like they're in heavy metal writing, but no one ever writes about heavy metal in that way and things. So I don't know. I think it's something for us always to be aware of when we're talking about horror and things.
Yeah. And if you think about some of the first horror feature films were like from the German Expressionist movement, so it's always art and horror, art house horror, and it's always been there from over a century. All right, I think we should move on to High Life.
Let's do it.
She's mine. I'm hers.
You?
We were scum. Trash. Refuse that didn't fit into the system. Until someone had the bright idea of recycling us to serve science.
The odds are not in our favor. But when my work is accomplished, when perfection is achieved...
Then what? Fly away?
I know I look like a witch.
You're foxy and you know it.
This mission can't turn our shame into some type of glory. I can't do this flying around no more.
You lied to us. You knew it.
The sensation, moving backwards. Even though we're moving forwards, getting further from what's getting nearer.
There is nothing to fear. Everything's gonna be fine.
Are you sick? You realize nothing is ever gonna go inside us?
Break the laws of nature. You'll pay for it.
On a spaceship speeding toward a black hole, a crew of prisoners, sentenced to a suicide mission to harness the space anomaly's energy, are the subjects of an ongoing experiment by the ship's chief scientist, Dibs. A criminal herself, serving life for murdering her family, Dibs is obsessed with breeding the first child in space through artificial insemination, using semen from the male prisoners to impregnate the women, with actual sex discouraged in favour of using a fuckbox to work out any uncontrollable urges. So far, the experiments are a failure, with all the babies dying of radiation. Dibs is also obsessed with crew member Monty, who does not donate his semen to the project. Nicknamed the Monk, he prefers to not get involved in favour of tending to the ship's garden. As they near the black hole and the crew's behaviour becomes more unhinged, Dibs sedates the crew and rapes Monty, using his semen to impregnate one of the female prisoners, Boys, who has fought back against Dibs' experiment. With Boys bringing the baby to term, the experiment is finally a success. This drives boys to madness, and in an attempt to escape, she kills the ship's pilot, Nansen, and takes her place in the shuttle that she was to fly around the black hole to complete the primary mission. However, the shuttle is knocked off course and Boys is sucked into the black hole and torn apart on a molecular level. Later, Dibbs is attacked by another prisoner, Mink, and Monty is forced to kill him. Dibbs herself admits to Monty the baby is his and then, distraught, puts herself through the airlock, killing herself. Monty's best friend, Cherney, who tended the garden with him, also commits suicide, leaving Monty alone on the ship with his daughter, who he names Willow. Monty raises Willow alone on the ship for years, until they come across another spaceship just like theirs. Monty boards the ship and finds only dogs, another experiment gone awry. As they approach another black hole, they grab the last shuttle and decide to slingshot around the black hole and escape its gravity. Father and daughter board the shuttle and fly toward the black hole, their future unknown. But at least they are going toward it together.
Did you see this at the cinema? What was your initial reaction when you first saw this film?
I did. I think at this time, Claire Denis was certainly someone I was keeping up with every new film that she had coming out. I was really excited about High Life. I love Pattinson. I love him in the Twilight films as well. I think there's, it's a different conversation, but there's, I think he's extraordinary in that. So yeah, I went to see this. I was in. I saw it at the Angelica in New York. I was in New York at the time when it came out, which is a really nice cinema because it's like a kind of arthouse cinema, but as a multiplex. It looks like a multiplex and everything, and it has the popcorn, but it plays a lot of arthouse films. So yeah, I saw it there, which was a lovely way to see it. I absolutely loved it at the time. I was so knocked out by it. I thought it was an extraordinary film, and it's really stuck with me since. That was the only time I'd seen it, and then I watched it again this week before doing this, and I think it really does hold up.
I think we saw it at the Rio in Dalston, and they've got two screens, and the screen 2 is very small, and it almost feels like a lounge room. And I remember we always used to try and see films in that screen, and we saw it there. Because it's such a small cinema, we often like to go like right up the front, and it just feels like you're just sitting right in front of this big screen. What are your thoughts when you remember seeing it the first time?
I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And watching it again, it's like, it's still so mysterious and fascinating, and so many little things that watching it a second time I'd completely forgotten about, or things I hadn't picked up on. I think you're going back to what you're saying, Craig, about art house directors doing genre and doing sci-fi. I feel like when you get an indie filmmaker or somebody doing like a film set in space, Solaris becomes up a lot. And I think that, and there's kind of like Tarkovsky, Stanislav Lem sort of thing. And I think there's some of that in this, but I think, because like Soderbergh even remade Solaris, The Nerve, but there's some of that in this, but I think, again, it's Denis. She can sit in the genre and take the elements and make them work for what she wants to do. And I think I remember watching it in the Rio and just being completely sort of immersed in it. And I love its kind of low budget nature that really works for it. I mean, it's the spaceship, like the space suits are on coat hangers. Like usually in there's every spaceship movie has an airlock and an airlock scene, and there's usually there's the big extravagant machinery, and there's a whole section where you get inside your spacesuit, but they've just got them on racks like it's H&M. I think that all works for it, not against it. I think it's all just so like meticulously put together in that way.
Because I remember really loving it, being really surprised where it goes to, and loving where the kind of places it goes to, the kind of transgressive nature, I think, of the film itself was really kind of up my alley. And I think also the fact that I guess it comes out, was it 2018?
Yeah.
I think 2018 or 19. Yeah. So like the other kind of big, it just looks so different to any of the other big sci-fi. Like I guess the few years before that, there would have been there's The Martian, Interstellar, Gravity. It just seems so completely different to any other things that were any other sci-fi, especially like outer space sci-fi that was happening at the time.
That's the thing I love that Liam, that you mentioned, I love how deliberately crap the spaceship looks inside. I love how lived in it is, and you get the feeling. I mean, it is a prison. You know, they're prisoners there as well, right? So it makes sense, and I think it's such a small change to make to the kind of the cinematic version of the spaceship. But I think it really brings something across. It makes it feel like its own little isolated society and things. And it's I can't remember seeing that in a sci-fi before. Not in a film anyway.
And I was reading some interviews with Denis, and she did actually say that she didn't think it was a science fiction film. However, I think, and it seems like more for her, it is almost like more a prison film. The fact that, so you have the kind of crew on the ship are all criminals and prisoners. I mean, the one person that's overseeing, the main person that's kind of seems to be overseeing them is Dr. Dibbs, played by Juliette Binoche, who is a doctor, but also she killed her family. She killed her children. So she was also a criminal. And I think at one point she even says, I committed the only crime that actually lives up to the name or something like that. I mean, you have the captain. I don't know. He dies quite quickly. But yeah, so it almost seems like that maybe she sees it almost more as like a prison film more than anything. So this is her first film made in the English language, and you've got this well-known star, Robert Pattinson, in the lead role. So what do you think of Robert Pattinson and his character Monty, and the fact that the crew is these prisoners?
I love that she cast Pattinson in this. I know it's the first proper English language film, the full English language film that she did. But I guess in a lot of her films, there's a lot of different languages that come from different places. You have lots of people, lots of nationalities in her films generally. So it's very rare, I think, for one of her films to just have French in it. I mean, even Trouble Every Day has a lot of English in it as well. And I like that idea that works particularly well for a spaceship as well, right? Where you have all these different nationalities, even though people are speaking English on the ship. I love that she'd said that she'd initially envisaged Vincent Gallo in the Pattinson role, because there is a certain quality that they both share. That stillness, that sort of quiet anguish. It feels like every single movement he makes is very deliberate. He's a kind of there's a lot of you can see that there's a lot going on behind the facade as well. And I think the scenes between him and the baby in the beginning are just so tender and so beautiful as well. And you've not seen Pattinson do that kind of role before. So I think he's just perfect for this.
Yeah, it seems like the moments he has with the baby feel improvised. Like it's like just him hanging out with the baby. Like I don't think you could really script that. You just kind of set up a situation, just get one of the best baby actors I've ever seen in a film, actually, one of the most responsive, than just them hanging out. And I mean, maybe he was given a few lines of dialogue to just make sure to say some things in order to, for the story, but it really just feels so natural. And that all that kind of is out of context, and you've got to watch the whole film to kind of realize that we're watching the kind of end of his towards the end of his emotional journey in the film, from this monk who, of course, still tends for life in the garden, but who kind of finds his freedom in a way through this child. It is really, really great performance.
Well, apparently the baby is like his best friend's baby.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So they, I guess they had the kind of existing relationship kind of there already. And so apparently, the baby's first steps are in the film.
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
Imagine that being a brag. Like, I didn't teach my baby to walk, but Robert Pattinson did.
Claire Denis shot my baby's first steps. Yeah.
But it's also interesting the fact that that you started the beginning of the film, these scenes just between him and the baby, and I even read somewhere that the beginning is like a lullaby, and he even does kind of sing that lullaby that becomes a song called Willow. But the fact that as you go along, that he's a prisoner, and it's just interesting that I think the original idea for the film was that Claire Denis was kind of reading up about, especially like in America, like death row, and it was some article or something complaining about, oh, we have to pay for these people on death row and they don't even work. And so she kind of was like, oh, well, you know, maybe this idea that, what if we wanted them to work and they have this death sentence, then putting them into space. And so it's almost this idea that she doesn't feel like is that far-fetched. And I think that was part of why she wanted them, you know, especially like American people, because it's like, well, there are still death row. There's still something that exists in the world today. And this is interesting, this idea of like that they're, I guess, prisoners being used as guinea pigs is something there's a long history of that. And they are kind of reduced to like animals, like they're guinea pigs, or there's all this imagery of dogs in the film. And I guess it's kind of like Laika, the dog. And I think even at the beginning of the film in voiceover, Robert Pattinson's character Monty even says, the idea came to recycle us. So it's almost like and there's a bit where he talks about taboo when he's recycling. I guess he recycles their waste, like for the garden or whatever. So it's almost like this reduction of these people. I don't know. It's just something about, I think, the use of prisoners is really, I think that's what is of interest to Denis, I think.
I think it's also quite a kind of pulpy idea as well, isn't it? The idea of sending prisoners to space and things to do that kind of thing. So it allows, so you're able to explore the kind of the real kind of social issues around death row and prisoners, but also draw on something that does have quite strong genre and pulp credentials.
Yeah, there's all these space prison films. Yeah. Even though she says she's not working in science fiction, there are a lot of these, like the space prison kind of science fiction elements. And science fiction is often seen as very sterile genre. There's this article by Vivian Sobchak that she wrote kind of decades ago. It was called The Virginity of Astronauts. And she was kind of still about, a lot of science fiction that it was almost like, I think she even said like a lot of astronauts in the kind of, I guess, like 50s, 60s sci-fi. I think she kind of likens them to Ken dolls, that they almost have no sexuality to them. And I guess in some ways you could say that especially even though it's your favorite film, 2001, there's a sterility to it all. Yeah. And then this film is awash in like bodily fluids, and you've got this fuck box at the center of it all. So how is Denis using the science fiction genre, even though she's saying she's not, but she kind of is?
Yeah, I think like that element, the more kind of the more red-blooded sexual element is quite prominent in science fiction literature, like especially in Philip K. Dick and things, and Zelazny and stuff, Gene Wolfe. I think it's more it just seems less prominent in cinema for some reason. I don't know whether that's just because a lot of science fiction films are big studio films and we just don't do that kind of thing anymore. But it does seem like a strange thing that's happened, because you mentioned Solaris. Even Solaris has quite a strong sexual element to it all the way through, but it does feel quite it does feel like a bit of a departure here, I think, as well, because you're breaking away from that sterility of modern science fiction, especially modern studio science fiction, and you're bringing in ideas of around the body and around desire and things, the kind of things that you wouldn't normally expect in that kind of film. And you do it so prominently, with the fuck box, with that kind of amazing sequence that's shot, in a very Claire Denis way, looking at the skin and stuff, but also the editing is much more frantic. It's more like a music video, that particular sequence, and it feels almost like a showpiece sequence in the middle of the film. But I love that about it. And I mean, there were plenty of people who have worked in areas of science fiction, not necessarily space-based science fiction, but people like Cronenberg and things were always interested in this idea of sexuality in the future and things beyond science. So I think it does have rich prominence within the genre, just not as much on the film side.
It's interesting because I guess there's so much of science fiction where it is almost like it's not so much about. It's almost divorcing the whole reproduction from what it actually is. So it all becomes very clinical. And this, it's still like, well, yeah, how do you do this? And so you still have, you still got to get the fluids from them. So you have the shock box and so it just seems there is this kind of preoccupation. I think that one of the most amazing kind of images is of Boise just after she's given birth and like just the milk on her torso. And there is all this dripping. Even the scar on Dibbs's belly, it seems like maybe it's a cesarean scar, but it almost, part of it goes down, like it is almost like a drip. So there's just these, and it is so much about the body. Like I think like Juliette Binoche has the most amazing back. Like there's just something, and I think Claire Denis was talking about like just the filming her body, and she said she filmed it like an odalisque or something.
Nice. And lots of hair. She has lots of hair in the film as well.
That's something I really picked up on the second watch, is that there is this idea of she's trying to control nature, and this whole thing about prisons and about spaceships. It's about confining people into this area and kind of denying them basic human necessity or things that we take for granted in because of, well, out of necessity. So like in a spaceship, you've got to be protected from the vacuum of space. So you're denied certain things. And then as a prisoner, you're denied certain things because of you're being punished. And so there's this attempt to control life, to box it in. But then there are these elements of like the garden is like, it looks like it's almost going to overgrow like the ship. That doesn't seem like it's being contained. Like we did another episode for this podcast about Danny Boyle, and we talked about sunshine, and in that, like the spaceship, there's the garden, which is used to provide food and oxygen to the spaceship, but it's all very regimented. It's like set up in this greenhouse, and it's all very picture perfect. But the garden in High Life is like, it's kind of viney, it's mossy, it's overrunning, it kind of feels wild, even though it's inside the spaceship. And then you have the idea that like Monty doesn't give his sperm to the experiment, but then it's kind of later taken from him and given to Boise, who's up until then, she's been given the inseminations, but she's not become pregnant. She says she can control her body through her will, but it's Monty's sperm that makes her pregnant. So it's almost like life finds a way somehow, right? And so it's this whole thing of trying to contain nature, but nature not being able to be contained, which I think is really interesting sort of ripple on that.
But then also with the garden, it's almost a bit kind of Garden of Eden-ish.
That's the first thing I wrote when we were watching in my notes was Garden of Eden ?
Yeah. And even like, I guess Dibbs with her long hair, but then also I guess you could say like Willow and Monty are kind of a new Adam and Eve, which is like, but they're also father and daughter. But then I guess you go back to like, Adam and Eve, how do we all come from just two people?
But for me, it feels like it's when because she takes the samples off the men to impregnate the women, and then her using the fuck box, because the way it's shot and the way it's done, it almost feels like, yeah, sure, she's probably using it for her own gratification, but it's almost like she hopes the experiment will work by doing that. You know what I mean? Like the ritual of intercourse needs to happen in order for the experiment to happen, because no one's actually physically allowed to have sex with each other, but that she's almost, using that as a way to be like, well, the act still needs to take place in some weird way in order and I think in her mind that will help the experiment succeed.
It doesn't Monty refer to as the shaman of sperm, and she's referred to like a witch, so there's almost something there. I think that there's this fixation on birth and parenthood, but it's perverted. Like it's this whole thing of Dibbs says she's obsessed with reproduction, but yet she killed her own children, so it's almost like she has to control it all. And, the forced impregnation through what is a rape. Yeah, she's likened to this witch. She's also maybe a bit of a mad scientist. What do you think of Dibbs as the character?
I love her, and I love that that suggestion that she might be a witch as well, because you don't get the sterile doctor running the spaceship or anything. You get someone who does that. She does seem to there is a bit of an occult power about her and something quite elemental. And obviously the way she looks as well, that kind of Medea element with the children. I think she's such an unusual character for this kind of film, and especially unusual as an antagonistic force on the ship. You don't tend to see characters like that in these kinds of films, which I think is where you get a lot of the power from.
And I think it's also interesting, this whole idea that she's almost it is playing with this idea of like the maternal, because she kills her own children, but she's obsessed with making new children. Some ways, the way she's tending to some of them can almost seem maternal, but then they're also desiring her at the same time. Some of the men, and the fact that she, like with Mad Scientist, she's playing God, and I think she even says, "You break the laws of nature and you'll pay for it." But yet, in some ways, that's what she's doing, and maybe that's what leads to her demise. And I was also thinking, like the other Claire Denis film, The Intruder, this whole, like in that, it takes the idea of the heart transplant, and the heart transplant is almost seen like as an intruder. But in that, I think it's through illegal means that he gets that heart transplant as well. So it's almost interesting, this idea of medical and like criminality and transgression, which also I guess relates to Trouble Every Day as well. So there's this interesting questioning of like science and transgression and crime that seems to be going on.
Both films have the sort of the science trying to transcend body limits, and having these consequences.
No autonomy over your own body, and as well in all three films, your body failing you.
So we have this central relationship between Monty and Willow. And we're talking about, at the beginning, it's just this beautiful relationship. But there is almost this, well, actually very early on, I think it's one of the first lines in the film, is Monty talking to Willow about taboo. And there is this almost taboo element as it goes along about the relationship between Willow and Monty. And I think it definitely something you can see in her other films as well. So if you want to talk about, this like Willow and Monty, and this idea that we have literally at the beginning defining taboo.
Yeah, and it's defining taboo again in terms of a bodily thing, right? So you don't drink your own piss. That's the definition of taboo. And then you get him like singing to her and using the words taboo. I think there's there's that idea, isn't it, that they are heading towards the black hole, they're heading towards oblivion. So you've got that's already written into the film. And there's this idea all the way through of transgressing on the way to oblivion. But it feels like they are trying to salvage something against odds, and maybe against where fate's actually taking them, but like the garden, and like the fact that they are father and daughter and things in their own way. I think there is something quite nice about the relationship, but there is also something troubling underneath that you don't really get into. This idea that you're in the face of something quite terrible that might be about to happen, even though we don't really see whether anything like that does eventually happen in the film.
And I think one of the moments in the film that's really a bit of a shock is when it suddenly cuts to Willow older, and at first you don't even know who it is, and then you realize it's Willow, and it's them in bed together, and then also that she's menstruating, and he kicks her out of the bed because of getting blood on the sheets, and so it is this shock of like, oh yeah. What was beautiful before with the baby, now it's this maturing young woman. Before you see her, it's a very extreme close-up of her hand in his hair, his hand in her hair, which almost recalls Dibbs's hair, which is, she doesn't look like her actual biological mother. She almost looks more like Dibbs, which is as well. And it also makes me think of like father-daughter relationships come up a lot in Denis films as well.
Yeah, it's Nanette and Bonnie and 35 Rooms. There are these elements there.
So the structure of the film, you're kind of going back and forth in time. It's not in a linear form. And a lot has been written about. It's very elliptical. I mean, maybe you just want to talk a bit about like the narrative structure and how and why it's kind of working in that way. Do you think?
I think I love that because it works really well. Because like the beginning of the film, like you're obviously starting, like Liam said, towards the end, but it feels like a beginning because it's a man looking after a baby on a largely empty ship by that stage. I think she does this kind of elliptical structures and nonlinear structures in a lot of her films, sometimes more than others. I think it works really well in creating a certain kind of mood, a certain kind of atmosphere, and it's a good way to to draw attention to a lot of the themes as well. You know, she's largely untroubled by plot, which I really like. I don't like, you know, I'm never particularly interested. I never particularly remember plots that well, but I like the ideas. And as a kind of a filmmaker that's very good at exploring ideas, I think it works. I think it works very well on those terms. And the fact that, you know, it's the journey is a descent as well into something, you know, pulling things out of the void, out of a black hole. So I think splitting it up the way she does works very well.
And for me, it almost seems like it starts at this very innocent place, and then you go back and you see how Willow came to exist is, well, she comes from this awful like violation of her mother and her father, but we start off this beautiful point. Obviously, she has no idea that that's how she was created, and then when you move to her older, and there's almost this allusion to possible kind of transgression moving forward, you know, the fact that she's now kind of matured, that it makes what was really beautiful and innocent and intimate at the beginning as a baby, now there's this weird or troubling aspect to it. So I think it's interesting in that way, that starts from this place of kind of absolute innocence. It is kind of a Garden of Eden, but then moving on from there.
From a storytelling point of view, what I picked up on was that the strange non-linear, semi-linear way that it's constructed can also be related to the fact that they are heading towards a black hole at like 99% speed of light, and that I mean, it's kind of it's referencing the idea of like time and relativity, and sort of things are kind of pulling apart narratively, and they're not quite making sense. And I don't know if something that I kind of picked up on was that as they get closer is when, you know, the crew starts acting strangely. Like the guy, is he the captain who has the stroke? Yeah, like he just has a stroke, and then like there's the one of the prisoners tries to rape one of the other ones, and just things start to fall apart. And it's almost like it's this again, this idea of nature and being pulled towards this singularity, basically, and like humanity can't quite sustain itself in the face of that. And I do think that there was Denis wasn't, pardon the pun, creating this in a vacuum. She was, I think she was researching a lot of sort of astrophysics in the background, because I think they do mention like the Penrose process, which is the whole thing when Boise steals the shuttle to go around because they're doing this experiment to harness the energy from the black hole. So there is some real hard science happening in the background there, which is why I thought that the influence of the black hole is kind of having on the crew itself. And then when Monty and Willow find the other spaceship and he goes on board and there's the dogs, that's like another experiment gone wrong sort of thing. When that first happens and they find the ship, I actually was thinking about the time, almost like this going backwards in time, and I actually thought maybe that's their ship, that they'd kind of come back around on themselves, but obviously that's not what happened. Yeah. But like I immediately just thought, oh shit, are we seeing this kind of loop in time? But that's not what happened. But you do get that at the end when they go off to try, and maybe they're going into the black hole, maybe they're trying to slingshot around it. But it's this unknowable journey into the void at the end, which I think is really haunting and beautiful.
I love that idea of things starting to go wrong as you're approaching the black hole as well. There's something very mythical about it. You know, it's like I've because of something I've been working on, I've been reading the Poetic Edda, which describes Ragnarok happening, you know, in Norse myth, and it talks about kin turning on kin, the cockerel crowing, the horn blowing, the earth shaking, the sea starting to boil. It's this kind of apocalyptic imagery, and that seems to like happen on the ship, as you mentioned, when they're getting closer and closer to the black hole.
Yeah.
And wasn't there the whole thing that not long after the film came out, they got that first photograph of the black hole, and it looks very similar to what you see in the film.
Yeah.
That it kind of predated it, but ended up being quite accurate. But I wanted to kind of switch gears a bit and just talk about a collaborator that works on most of Claire Denis' films, who was Stuart Staples from the band Tindersticks. He does the music for Trouble Every Day and for High Life. And he's just someone that his music is kind of an integral part of all of Claire Denis' films. I listen to a lot of the soundtracks all the time. So I just to talk about, what do you think about the kind of contribution that's to the music in these films?
I think it's like a composer and director relationship like no other. I think I'd read there was a piece I think about 15 years ago in the Independent where they interviewed both Claire Denis and Stuart Staples about how they met. And she said that she'd gone to their concert at the Bataclan in the mid-90s because she'd been listening to the first two Tindersticks records over and over and over when she was writing the script for Nanette and Bonnie. So it's like it was already there, like the soundtrack was already there for her. She knew what she wanted because she'd been listening to it in this way. And to then work with not just with the band, but with Staples and also Dick and Hinchcliffe from the band, who also has done some of the other soundtracks for her film solo. It's a really interesting relationship. I think the soundtrack in this one, where it's very drone based and things, is I love it. I think it works very well with the film. I think the one that he did for Trouble Every Day is an absolute all timer because. It does one thing which I love in films, which is to include the film title in the actual soundtrack, like it's a fucking Django film or something. I love that about it. And I love you get the same motif in which he says the phrase "trouble every day" in the song just gets repeated by different instruments at different pitches all the way through. It's an amazing way to do a soundtrack. They just seem to have that incredible relationship, as she seems to have with a lot of people as well. She seems to have with a screenwriter, with Agnes Goddard up until High Life, I guess, and a lot of the same actors as well. I guess it allows you to really double down on your vision when you know that you've got this stock company of collaborators that you can call upon.
Yeah, I mean, even just mentioning the title "Trouble Every Day," I start humming the song. It's just it's so linked to that film, and they just come together so beautifully.
And I think with the Trouble Every Day soundtrack, it's these like very romantic strings, but amongst all this horror. And I believe because I was looking into, and High Life, actually, it took years, like I think of Vincent Gallo, and I think at one point she even was trying to get Philip Seymour Hoffman. And then when someone suggested Robert Pattinson, she was like, oh, he's too young and he seems a bit too beautiful. And then she'd found the girl playing the kind of teenage Willow, and she'd found her a few years, and then the film kept getting pushed back. And so I think, or possibly Willow was supposed to be a bit younger, because she was like, oh, I really wanted, I'm blanking on her name. I apologize. But that she really wanted her, but yet things were taking so long, and she was obviously growing. So I believe that by the time they came to make the film, that in this case, a lot of the music had actually been composed in advance of making the film, which, obviously doesn't normally happen.
But doesn't Robert Pattinson guest vocal on the track, on the Willow song?
Yes.
As well?
Yeah. So Stuart Staples doesn't sing on the High Life soundtrack. You get Robert Pattinson, who I think is actually a musician. I think
it's a great song.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I listen to both songs all the time. But before we go, let's just talk about this open ending. You have this ending where they've decided to leave the ship and they're going towards this black hole, and it just kind of ends with, I think it's Monty just says, "Shall we?" And Willow says yes. And it just ends. What do you make of this open ending, or what is it kind of saying at the end?
It feels to me like it's stopping before something terrible happens, before you get to the stage where you feel like it's going to go all the way through. It feels like it stops you and deprives you of that in a kind of maybe like a final act of mercy in the film. I think it's particularly brilliant that it does end at that stage and doesn't actually show what follows up afterwards, because it does feel abrupt even within the film. It doesn't feel like I watched that last scene twice this week because it still took me by surprise again. But I think it works very well given the fact that you feel that you know where the film is going, or certainly where it's going tonally.
What about you?
I mean, both Trouble Every Day and High Life end on these ambiguous notes of like a couple of characters sort of going into an unknown future, and we're never really certain about what's going to happen. It could be really bad, could be good. It's probably for Trouble Every Day. It's probably going to be very bad. But I found a strange bit of hope in the end of High Life. I think you want them to succeed, but then you also understand that it's probably futile. But it's also this idea of, like, going back to what I was saying about sort of life not being able to be restrained by these elements. It's almost this, like, because we saw Boise get spaghettified by the black hole when she flew into it because she did it wrong or whatever. But then it's kind of like knowing that that's probably what's going to happen, but kind of having this like thing like, but this time it could be different. And that's kind of that's life, isn't it? It's like, maybe this time, things are going to be different. And maybe that's overly romantic or not, but I do love that there's that kind of little tinge of hope there, I think.
But then also at the same time, like you were saying, Craig, that maybe it stopped before something awful happened. Like maybe it's just this complete oblivion. But then also it might be stopping before they cross the ultimate taboo. And I was reading an interview with Claire Denis, and she actually said, what happens at the end of the film when the young woman who has no other man on hand, who doesn't even know that this man is handsome because she's never had anyone to compare him to, makes the first move. I wanted both of them at the end standing as if before the marriage altar. The woman's yes is like the bride's I do. We are approaching the forbidden planet, the absolute taboo. Yeah, so...
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Forget what I said.
Me too.
But then also, like in another interview, she just says at the end they reach eternity, a singularity where space and time reach zero. So it is just this, it's almost like you can't really show what happens because it's just beyond anything we could ever conceive of. That's a much nicer way of thinking about it than, the other way. But again, it's this whole thing of like, you can come up with so many interpretations, which I'm glad. I'm glad that it doesn't give us anything to kind of say it's just this one thing, because it has to be, I guess, everything.
And it's in keeping with the way that the whole film has been up to then as well, the way it's withheld with you, the way that she operates as a filmmaker. I think it works perfectly within that context.
The film is now, I guess coming up to like 8 or so years old. So what do you kind of feel like as time goes on? Do you think this is a film that's going to be considered a significant one in Denis' filmography?
I think it's hard to say. I think so, because like there's been a lot more negativity about her work since, I guess, which is quite unusual for her films. But yeah, I think this is a significant film. I always think any time there's a good science fiction, that it's quite significant because there are so few of them that tend to come out. I think it speaks to a certain type of anxiety about where people are going and things, and that's always going to be a strong idea. So yeah, I would imagine that people continue to watch it, and that it has some kind of high status in her canon.
Yeah, I think that's true, and that I think Pattinson's involvement as well. I mean, he's just going from strength to strength. He's kind of everywhere at the moment, and I think that'll open doors to people seeking this film out. And yeah, I think it being a really well done sci-fi that we don't get a lot of, as you said, is part of its strengths and why it will probably sustain over the years. Yeah.
I hope so. I hope it's an A24 film, which is also interesting. And how it's kind of maybe kind of seen within that canon or whatever as well. Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen a lot of really mixed responses, but I mean, I remember when it came out, that was like my favorite film of the year. And watching it again, I think it's just so stunning. And hopefully it is something that more people find over time, especially when discovering her work as well.
Yeah, I think the mixed response thing is interesting because like even though I've written a decent amount about film, I've never like I've never been like a critic or anything. I don't have that kind of critical mind. And I think when you've got that, not like the film critic mind, for example, but I think when you've got a director like Claire Denis or any of the greats, really, I think it's really foolish to take it for granted that you're going to get these works all the time. There's one of my favorite bands, The Fall, finished one album by just whispering, "You don't deserve rock and roll." And when I think about something like this getting a mixed review, I just think, you don't deserve rock and roll. You know, like you're getting given all this stuff and it's there for you, and it's a really beautiful thing. And I think, you know, it would be really foolish to take this kind of work for granted when it's clearly quite significant.
All right,
sure.
I think we'll leave it there. Yeah. We love Claire Denis. She's awesome.
Yeah.
Keep making films. All right. Thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. That was lovely.
SciFrights is hosted, produced and edited by Liam Dunn and Lindsay Hallam.
Theme music by Damo Alexander and Rosie Gilbey.
Artwork by Millie Hallam.
And please follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube and Letterboxd.
And please rate and review our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and share it with someone you know. It really does help.